The building looked ordinary during the day. 5 stories of aging brick, narrow windows with faded curtains, and a rusted fire escape clinging to the back wall like a skeleton. The kind of place people rented when they needed something cheap and temporary. I told myself I would only stay a year. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old cooking oil. The carpet was worn flat from decades of footsteps, and the lights flickered in a way that made the corridor feel longer than it should have been. My apartment was 3A. Directly across from me was apartment 3B. I noticed the door the first day I moved in. 3 heavy deadbolts ran down the center of it, but they weren't the strangest thing. Someone had screwed a steel plate across the entire lock mechanism, sealing the door shut from the outside. It looked less like security and more like containment. When I asked the landlord about it, he paused for just a moment too long. "Old storage unit," he said finally, "nothing important." He changed the subject immediately after that. I didn't push further. Cheap apartments come with strange details. If you question all of them, you never find a place to live. The first few nights were quiet, too quiet. Most apartment buildings carry noise through the walls, televisions, arguments, footsteps from upstairs neighbors. But after midnight, this building seemed to fall into a deep silence, a silence that felt unnatural. The knocking started on the 4th night. 3 slow taps echoed through the hallway. Knock, knock, knock. I woke instantly and checked the time. 12 a.m. I waited for the sound to repeat, but it didn't. The next night it happened again. Exactly midnight. 3 knocks. This time I got up and opened my door. The hallway was empty. The weak overhead light flickered near the stairwell, casting thin shadows along the walls. For a moment I thought the knocking had come from my own apartment. Then I realized something. The sound had come from 3B. I stepped closer to the sealed door. Dust had collected along the edges of the metal plate, but something else caught my attention. The door looked slightly warped, like pressure had been pushing against it from the inside. I leaned closer. For a moment, I thought I heard breathing. Slow, uneven. I stepped back quickly and returned to my apartment, telling myself it was imagination. Old buildings make noises, pipes expand, walls settle. There are always explanations. The 3rd night changed everything. The knocking returned, but this time it came from my door. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up slowly in bed. The sound was deliberate, polite, not frantic. I walked to the door and checked the peephole. The hallway was empty, but I could hear breathing right outside. Soft, close. "Hello?" I said through the door. Silence, then a voice answered, thin, old. "Wrong door." The voice hadn't come from the hallway, it had come through the wood of the door itself. Before I could react, another sound echoed behind me, 3 taps. On the wall beside my bed, knock, knock, knock. The wall separating my apartment from 3B. My throat tightened. I backed away slowly as the knocking continued. Not frantic. Patient. Then the voice returned. But now there were 2 voices, a man and a woman. "We've been waiting," the woman whispered. Something creaked in the hallway. I forced myself to check the peephole again. The metal plate on apartment 3B's door was bending, slowly. The bolts strained against the frame, as if something inside the apartment was pushing outward. The steel warped further until it tore loose with a sharp snap and clattered to the floor. The deadbolts slid open, one by one. The door creaked inward. Inside the apartment was darkness, not shadow, something thicker. something that seemed to swallow the hallway light. Two figures stepped forward slowly, an old man and an old woman. Their skin looked gray and stretched too tightly over their bones. Their eyes were empty, but both of them were smiling. The man tilted his head. "You shouldn't have answered," he said softly. Then they turned toward my door and knocked. 3 slow taps, this time from the inside of my apartment. Claire moved into apartment 3A in the middle of winter. The building looked colder than the rest of the street, even during the day. The brick walls were darker, the windows duller, like the place had been slowly absorbing shadows for decades. Still, the rent was cheap. Cheap enough that she ignored the warning signs. The landlord didn't show her around the building when she moved in. He handed her the keys in the lobby and pointed toward the stairwell. "3rd floor," he said. When she asked if there were many neighbors, he hesitated. "Some," he said. Then he walked away. The hallway on the 3rd floor felt strange the moment she stepped into it. Not dangerous exactly, just quiet in a way apartment buildings usually aren't. The carpet muffled her footsteps. The ceiling lights hummed weakly. Across from her door was apartment 3B. The door was sealed. 3 heavy deadbolts and a metal plate screwed across the lock. Claire stared at it for a long moment before unlocking her own door. She told herself it was probably just an old storage unit, but the door felt like it was watching her. The first few nights were peaceful. The silence helped her sleep, until the knocking started. The first time it happened, she woke suddenly with the feeling that someone had called her name. Then she heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow taps from the hallway. She checked her phone. 12 a.m. Claire sat up in bed and listened carefully. Nothing followed. The building fell silent again. She convinced herself it had been the pipes. Old buildings make sounds. That was normal. The second night it happened again. Exactly midnight. Knock, knock, knock. This time she went to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but she noticed something strange. The knocking hadn't come from her door. It had come from apartment 3B, the sealed apartment. She stepped into the hallway and stood in front of the door. The metal plate looked solid, but something about it bothered her. The bolts weren't dusty like the rest of the hallway. Someone had touched them recently. Claire leaned closer. For a moment, she thought she heard something behind the door, a faint whisper. She stepped back immediately and returned to her apartment. That night, she slept with the lights on. The whispering began 3 nights later. Claire was lying in bed when she heard it. Not knocking. Voices. Soft. Muffled. She sat up slowly and pressed her ear against the wall between her apartment and 3B. At first, the words were impossible to understand. Then the voices became clearer. A man and a woman. "And someone is there," the woman whispered. "Yes," the man replied. "We heard them walking." Claire's heart began pounding. The voices sounded too close. Not like they were coming through thick concrete walls. They sounded like they were right behind the plaster. Then the man said something that made her stomach turn. "We've been waiting for the new one." Claire stepped away from the wall. Her hands were shaking. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone had broken into the sealed apartment. Maybe the landlord had rented it out secretly. But deep down, she knew something was wrong, because the whispering didn't stop. The next night, the knocking returned. Knock, Knock. Knock. This time Claire did something she would regret forever. She knocked back. Just once. Silence followed. Then the woman laughed softly from the other side of the wall. You hear us now? Claire felt cold all over. What do you want? She whispered. The answer came slowly. Open the door. Claire stood in the hallway staring at apartment 3B. The metal plate looked the same as before. But now she noticed something else. The door itself was moving, not swinging, breathing. The wood expanded slightly outward, then settled again, like something inside was pushing against it. A thin crack had formed between the door and the frame. Cold air seeped through the gap, and a smell. Rot. Old rot. Claire's hand trembled as she reached toward the bolts. Part of her wanted to run, but something else inside her mind kept repeating the same thought. They're trapped. They need help. She unscrewed the first bolt, then the second. The final bolt screeched loudly as it came loose. The metal plate fell to the floor with a heavy clang. The hallway went completely silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. Inside apartment 3B was darkness. Not shadow, something deeper. The kind of darkness that swallows light. Claire leaned forward slightly. Hello? Something moved inside. Two figures stepped slowly into the hallway light. An old man and an old woman. Their skin looked gray and thin, stretched over bone. Their eyes were empty, but both of them were smiling. The woman tilted her head. Thank you, she whispered. Claire stepped backward. What happened to you? The man answered calmly. We died. The woman's smile widened, but no one opened the door. Then they stepped past her into the hallway. The air became colder as they moved. The old man stopped in front of apartment 3A, Claire's apartment. He raised his hand and knocked. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the hallway. Claire felt something moving behind her. She turned slowly. The door to apartment 3B was closing again, the darkness inside it shifting, waiting. The woman looked back at Claire. You opened the door, she said gently. Now you stay. The police found Claire the next morning. She was lying on the floor of apartment 3A, cold, still, her face frozen in confusion. Across the hallway, apartment 3B was sealed again. Fresh bolts, fresh metal plate. But the tenants on the third floor still say that sometimes, at exactly midnight, someone knocks 3 times and waits for someone new to answer.